Hi everyone, it's Brenda back again with another episode of Three Uniques. Today I have on Christa Ovenell. Hi Christa, how are you doing today?
I'm so great. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, Brenda.
I'm happy to have you here too, and I love what we're going to talk about today. So Christa's business, she's the founder of the Death's Apprentice, and the Death's Apprentice is all about holistic advanced care planning. And next to that, Christa's also a licensed funeral director, an embalmer, an end-of-life doula, and a community death educator. So, for some of us that are just tuning into this podcast, my podcast is all about the three uniques and understanding what makes us unique. I believe that Christa is in this, not in a unique profession per se. This has been going, being a funeral director, embalmer, but like talking about death has been, it's part of our existence as human beings. But I think you've got such a unique business that I'm really excited to have you share a little bit more about it with us.
Thank you. Yeah, Death's Apprentice Education and Planning is kind of in its own little niche.
Mhm.
I work with people to help them think about and talk about, but really importantly, to plan for not just life's uncertainties, which are things we can actually put some stuff in place around, but also for the one thing that we can absolutely all be certain of, right?
Right.
Which is death.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you talk about holistic advanced care planning, what does that look like for people?
So I sneakily added the word holistic
Mm,
into what some people might have heard in the past of advanced care planning, planning for things, medical decision making in advance of it happening. But I have found that kind of regimented governmental process to be a little bit isolating, and
mhm.
a bit chaotic, to tell the truth, because what happens is these programs, these government workbooks and things like that, they'll take these absolutely huge questions and say things like, okay, could you kindly just tell me about your beliefs and values? And people have like no context. They're not being guided at all. They're like, I thought we were going to talk about death, and I thought we were going to talk about end of life. And it's chaotic and unstructured. And most people who I work with, they actually have the free government handbook on
Right.
their shelves, unfilled out,
Yeah.
because as helpful as it has tried to be, it's actually not helpful. So what I do is I take the really good sound principles from advanced care planning, from medical advanced care planning, and
Mhm.
I actually include and interweave the legal, financial, administrative planning that needs to take place, the medical and philosophical decision making, disposition, which is like funeral ceremony, after death decisions that will have to
Right.
be made, and also legacy, emotional heirlooms, if you
Mhm.
will. And I weave those together. And when people work with me over usually a period of about 5 weeks, whether they're doing it individually or in group settings, but by going through these steps, they'll have everything like tied up and together. So that's what I call holistic advanced care planning.
And how can people work with you? Because you mentioned, say, over 5 weeks. Like, I know that you have some programs. Feel free to
Oh,
let
thank
me
you.
know what those
Well,
look like.
absolutely. I do work one to one with folks, and two to one. Sometimes, often couples. I find that kind of lovely. And
Right.
there's some great date nights that I always get told about afterwards. They're like, we had the most amazing conversation, which is wild because you don't always think that when you're
Yeah,
talking
death and
about
dating.
death.
I don't know.
Yeah, who knew? All
Yeah.
right, so one-to-one work is absolutely always on the table. A few times a year, and actually just coming up in September, I offer something called Prep School, and that's a 5-week program. It
Mhm.
is the same curriculum, but it's a little more regimented because we're doing it in a group setting, and we're doing it. You're kind of keeping up, right? It's recorded, so if anybody misses anything, they can always come back. Sorry. And then the last option is that, and this is something that I'm just so excited to be getting off the ground, but I'm working actually now in corporate settings. So
Mm,
I'll go into a business that has a really comprehensive understanding of care for their employees.
right.
And when you onboard and you might fill out a bunch of paperwork around your RSP and stuff like that. Well,
Beneficiary
actually,
information.
benefit
Yeah.
exactly all that stuff. Often that brings up other questions. And
Mhm.
often, when a company has, especially a smaller mid-sized company, has experienced a loss or something in their company,
Right.
either an employee who's died, or an employee and a key employee has had a family death,
Right.
things become so chaotic so quickly. And so companies that approach me have often very recently experienced something like that, and
Right.
they get me in to walk their employees through in a very gentle way,
Right.
probably, to be perfectly honest, not quite as in depth as the 5 weeks programming, but still very comprehensive and extremely practical for just like getting those ducks lined up. So, three options really: get your boss to pay for it yourself, or pay a little less and do it in a group setting.
I love that. I think it's a great extension of benefits. And
Yeah.
as we're also looking at a lot of the boomers leaving their jobs, it's going to be a large exodus. I mean, they might be going into consulting practices, not necessarily leaving the workforce, but they're obviously aging. And so making sure that they've got those things lined up for themselves too.
It's
So,
so important.
yeah, it's a
And
great
you know, as a not that you asked, but as a funeral director, I mean, really where this was born from, I made a midlife transition into this work anyway,
Mhm.
which is very common in funeral directing. You don't often come into it straight out of high school, right? So it's not
Right.
uncommon for people to be in their kind of mid-career point when they move into this realm. But what I found over and over was that I would be sitting in front of people who had just experienced, like, really truly the worst day of their lives. Somebody they loved died, and their first question is, what do I do now?
Mm,
And like, in what other setting would that be acceptable? I don't even know why it's legal to make funeral arrangements when you're in the throes of grief. I think like that is just a terrible, 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 terrible idea. And I've seen people make decisions that they regret. I've
right.
seen people feel so overwhelmed that they can't even be present at what is, let me tell you, a very important time.
Right.
And I was just like, you know what? If I can save one family, and then I kind of changed that to, if I can save every family from from
Wow.
having to go through this, then I'll be happy. So I got some work to do.
Yeah, and I'm all about big vision, so that's amazing. What stops people from doing this planning?
Well, um, uh, a lot of it is personal fear,
Hmm.
but I'm very much one about personal accountability. But I'm actually going to step back here and say society has a lot to do with
Right.
why we're not willing to do this work. It's actually less to do with us and our personal fears,
Hmm.
and in my opinion, more to do with the way society has built over the last 150 years or so this kind of coding, this protective, an opaque coating around death and dying and everything to do. We don't die at home anymore. We
Right.
don't have home funerals anymore for the most part, although stick with me, we'll probably make that a thing again too. And and what it means is that we don't see death as part of life.
Mm,
And because we don't see death as part of life, we lose the language for it.
right.
And what ends up happening is people sit in front of me and say, what do I do now? Because I literally don't have a clue. I will sit with people older than us, Brenda, who are experiencing their first death. That's very common, right? And they're all of a sudden thrust into making all these decisions that they had no idea about. And I'm not just talking about which casket to get. I
Hmm.
mean, if there's no will, then there's just like utter chaos that will
Sure. All
ensue.
the
And even
legal,
if all the
financial.
legal financial stuff,
Yeah.
and even if some of that is done, if the conversations weren't had, then it's going to be kind of a disaster. But to get back to your question, really, they stop because we haven't been given permission. The last decade or so has really changed that. The death positive movement, I'm part of that, and there's a lot of really cool women in particular like me who are helping this conversation reemerge. But we've still got some work to do, and until we do, I think it will be hard for people to really embrace doing this work. But as I mentioned, often like in a company setting, companies reach out to me after they've experienced that first loss. They're like, "Whoa, this was a nightmare." I find that
Right.
personally as well, where someone will have experienced something where they've had a dear friend who has just gone through something really difficult, and they're like, "There is no way I'm leaving my loved ones like that."
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the nudge to get people. Often it's a very negative motivator, but you can switch it a bit too and have it be a positive motivator. I've seen this thing that I don't want to have, and therefore I'm going to do this for other
And I
people.
think the message that you're sending out there to the world, to all these families that you're going to impact, is that you can get ahead of this so that, yes, maybe you saw your neighbor or a friend go through this, awkward, tough, challenging situation to navigate with their own loss in their family or their friend group. But now you're providing this vehicle, right? So that people can get
Yes.
ahead of it. because even
Yes.
still, like even when I've witnessed people going through that, now it's like, okay, where do I begin, right? And so
Yes.
until I actually work with someone like yourself, it's still going to be an awkward process because it's not necessarily, to your point, very transparent, very easy to navigate. And then you show that workbook for all the people that are, taking in the podcast episode versus watching this on YouTube. Krista held up this like workbook, which is like thick and it's ominous, and it's just like, oh, do I really
And
want to?
it's written by government
And do I
wonks,
want to
you
go
know.
through this? Like,
No,
no,
you don't.
please. Like, that's not what I really want to do on a Saturday afternoon when I've got
Right.
time off.
With
But
your
it's,
precious time,
yeah,
right? With your precious time, really, I want to actually have think about these hard topics and then reflect on them and then share them. Well, when you do it in an inquiry based way with
mhm,
inquiry based programming, what it
right.
actually ends up being is this really beautiful thing. Like I said, the date night thing. I work with so many couples who are like, whoa, that was like the best Wednesday night ever,
Yeah.
because I never knew that about him. Or and to this day, so far, about a year in, I haven't actually gone through with one couple where at some point they didn't surprise one another.
Hmm.
And I love that. And I'm talking couples who've been married like long, 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 long time
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And then, so if we don't do the planning, what are some of the, gotchas or things that we need to anticipate? Or, well, and if it's about ourselves, that now our loved ones have to kind of clean up and,
That's the key. I've often heard really avoidant people say things like, who cares? I won't be here anyway.
yeah,
Well, you know what? Unless there's been a mass tragedy,
right.
someone you love will be there.
Yeah.
And I don't know what kind of jerk you are in life, but I doubt you're that kind of jerk.
Well,
So I
yeah.
doubt you would wish that
And
on
like you said
on
earlier, like
anyone.
while they're that, while that loved one is trying to navigate their own grieving process, they've got to deal with, I don't know, your estate that wasn't tidied up.
That wasn't tidied up or what
Yeah.
have you. So a couple of things. If you, for one of, you're not supposed to have favorites, but I really do love a will. Just even just having a will put you ahead of the curve. But there's more to it than just that. When you die intestate without a will, you have your estate, whatever that may be, teeny or great big vast with holdings all over the world, you have and your family has no control over the execution of that estate. None whatsoever. It is actually going to be divvied up
Hmm.
by following laws that were written quite some time ago,
Yeah.
and without you in mind, my
Hmm.
friend, without you and your personal unique situation in mind. And
Hmm.
there's nothing you can do to change that. The other thing is that if you die intestate, it will take, in today's court system, at minimum 12 weeks, but I have heard as much as 8 or 9 months. And it's going to cost you likely not less than $5,000 to appoint someone who will become um, the not the executor of your estate, the administrator of your
Right.
estate, because you haven't appointed an executor.
Yeah.
An administrator will have to be appointed,
Who
and
doesn't
that
know
is
your
going to take
family, doesn't
who
know your
does it
family,
well.
doesn't know your
It
time.
will often be a family member,
Well, it could be.
but it might not be a willing family member,
Oh,
and
right.
and it's also going to go down a very so what if the first administrator in line is like the 80-year-old wife who doesn't even know where the bank accounts are? Like, that's a bad idea, right? But it has to follow these sets of rules that are laid out, and the cost and the complexity of dealing with that is just unnecessary. I mean, you can get an online will for $30. You can work with a kind of a lawyers and lattes kind of thing for a couple of hundred, and you can hire the fanciest estate lawyer for a couple of thousand. You're still $3,000 less than what it's going to cost you minimum
Right.
to do it if you haven't taken that step. And even if we take like death off the table, because at the beginning I said, I also help people deal with the uncertainties at end of life or throughout life, sudden incapacitating serious illness,
Accidents. Yeah.
accidents, things that we might actually recover from. Death is not even on the table, but they are going to mess us up for a
Hmm.
little while, right? Couple of things that you really need to have in place at a time like that, from a legal perspective, an enduring power of attorney, so that someone can make legal and financial decisions on your behalf.
Right.
Right? Very simple. So hard to open or close a bank account, so hard to cancel a subscription, so hard to change a phone plan unless you have an enduring power of attorney in place, right? And a medical advocacy, a medical advocate appointed. Here in British Columbia, we call that a representative.
Okay.
We can use the phrase medical advocate for any other jurisdiction.
Yeah.
There are a few different terms out there, and if we, it's good to have the paperwork. But getting back to the holistic piece, if you have simply signed the papers, but you've never talked about what would I do if, how do I feel about,
Hmm.
what are my feelings on, and then now you're asking somebody to make these huge and potentially life altering decisions for you, it's
Yeah.
not quite enough.
Yeah.
That's why it's actually very layered and integrated. Is it hugely important to get the legal paperwork done? Yes, absolutely. Very, very important. But to do that in its own, on its own, that actually also leads to chaos. You want to do it in a way where you're using an inquiry-based approach that will help you unlock, pull back the veil on your beliefs and values, help you express them simply, pragmatically to the people who you're asking to make these important decisions on your
Right.
behalf. And that's holistic advanced care planning.
I love it. I love it.
I'm
So
glad.
everyone that's listening, I mean, like there's just already some gems that you can take away just from this session alone. But I think to Krista's point, there's a lot of stuff that's out there on the internet, some low cost solutions, some higher cost solutions, and it helps to have someone like Krista that can help you navigate that and make some really clear decisions based off of not just the, like the checks and balances, but like again, your intentions. What's the legacy that you want to leave behind to your community, to your friends, your
Yes.
family, that impact? And is it going to be like, oh, thanks for leaving me this hairdo, Brenda? Or, well,
Yeah, thanks for this hairy mess or
yeah,
what. And yeah,
or, thanks for allowing us to, spend that time honoring you and grieving over you and mourning you and knowing that, some of these other logistic things have been taken care of.
taken care of. Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
I
totally.
love it. So, Krista, let's talk about your three uniques because I'm
Okay.
curious how I'm always curious how your three uniques tie into kind of like what you do and what you're contributing to the world. But let's just talk about them right now, and I'm curious how they fall out or they shape up for you.
I ask people questions all the time, inquiry based programming, right? You asking me the three uniques, I was like, oh my God. I mean, I think I lost sleep over that, right? So I have put thought into this, but
Yes.
what I've come up with is that my first one is that I am deeply knowledgeable about a topic that many people have far more misinformation on than they have correct information. I have a depth of knowledge about death, end of life, as both an event
Mm-hmm.
and an experience.
Mm.
And there's really not very many people who have that depth of knowledge.
Right.
I'm also expansively hospitable. I live in a tiny little space, and there I have designed it myself and carefully so that it's like living in a place I can have myself, my partner, and two whole totally unique and different couples or sets of people over, and there's spots if you don't mind acting like you're on a ship and having everything kind of pushed in and pulled out and whatnot.
Right.
Being hospitable to me, making space for people to feel comfortable in my home and be fed and be watered and be nourished,
Mm-hmm.
and be quiet and have the things they need without even really needing to ask for it. I think that is a unique a differentiator of mine. And I mean, lots of good Martha Stewart hostesses out there, but this is like in my DNA.
And before hearing your third one, I think one of the things I would comment on, there was a reel that you posted the other day on your Instagram page, a video that you posted on your Instagram page, and you were talking about the quiet room.
Yeah,
So,
you saw that.
when,
Good.
when there's a celebration of life going on and maybe, it's upstairs, depending if you're in a church or a funeral home or wherever you're having it in community center or even
Hotel.
a hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of places, but it's like you've got the main room where things are going on, maybe slideshows and this and that going on, but that there's also a quiet space because during that moment, either family, friends, whoever's attending may just need some moments to kind of get caught up, connected to themselves, like have a moment to cry or talk quietly with another person that knows the person that passed away. And
Think
I,
of all the introverts who
yeah,
don't, who just genuinely need quiet space.
yeah, or the extroverts that are completely overwhelmed because they've extended themselves so far
That's
in,
right.
in this process. But I loved how you explained it, and that whole hospitality piece came through in the video loud and clear. Like I can see how, like you were sharing this tip around what you could be doing in a celebration of life for the people that are there, but and yourself, but also you could see your uniqueness of being
Mm.
this hospitable person come through. So I
Oh,
love
that is so super sweet of you. And it's actually, you know what, my third, maybe it's cheating a little bit, but I feel that I'm uniquely able to help people find comfort. And I do this in my work setting. I do this helping people find comfort in difficult and challenging questions, in difficult and challenging topics and whatnot. But I also, um, as someone who sits with people at the hardest time when somebody they have just loved dies and now they died and now they have to make a whole bunch of decisions and sign 14 separate sheets of paper so
wow,
that the
yeah.
cremation can take place. I have been told many times that I can't believe how comfortable you made this. I can't believe that it was as peaceful as this. And I think that being very knowledgeable about something, having this deep, deep, deep undercurrent of hospitality, just like coloring everything that I look at and then I see, I think that has led naturally to good thing that I do this for a living, to being the kind of person who can. We hear the phrase making space a lot,
Hmm.
and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I think that I can make space for people to find comfort in what can often be a really, really uncomfortable situation.
So for you, that extension of like gratitude, well, generosity, I think is the key thing, right? Like
Mm,
this generous belief in caring for people and helping people feel comfortable. What do you do to kind of nourish yourself?
what
Because
a
like in
great
your
question.
occupation, you are obviously like thrust into situations, planned or unplanned. You mentioned there's people that come to you probably with not a lot of planning and like, Krista, please help me out. In these dire situations, maybe that's a lot of like emotional stuff coming your way. How do you nourish yourself so that you can still go out there and be this generous,
I do
kind,
that.
compassionate person that you are?
Um, that's such a great question and so important for so many like female entrepreneurs, for people in caring settings and things like that. I had to first acknowledge that it existed, and I think that what I was doing was hard. And I think that for so many of us, people that do have these kinds of roles, it's
Hmm.
like just because it's what we do day in and day out. Like
Hmm.
that is a huge first step. Acknowledge that it's difficult. For me, it came in a total. I was completely unprepared for the way it came to me, but I was actually at a cemetery at a public facing event, and it was beautiful. It was during the week of Remembrance, like Day of the Dead, the week of the
Hmm.
dead, and I was just blown away by the wave of grief that escaped me, and I was like, oh. Right. I have not attended to any of the grief that I have been given to hold, you
Right.
know? And so that was the first step. And then I made that, and then, whew, boy, that was unexpected and big and kind of took the wind out of my sails, I'll have to admit. And
Hmm.
now I've managed to work in a few things. I recently started swimming, and I find because I'm so bad at it that
Hmm.
all I can concentrate on is not drowning, and I find that that is actually genuine. Like I'm tired when I
Yeah.
when I finish it.
Yeah.
um, there are some really, I mean, I have some good friends, and I have a few people who are in this space as well, and I think it wouldn't be unique in other, maybe firefighters or what have you, like other people who have seen it, or ambulance attendants or something like that, right? Nurses might talk to other nurses. So I do that. I talk to other funeral directors and other people who work in morgue spaces or around dead people,
Right.
and I find that that's pretty helpful. And when all else fails, I mean, there's always red wine, but that's not a good idea actually. And what you really should do is be sure that there's you're not crutching that, you're not using that as a crutch.
Yeah.
And so I definitely like more. Oh, and also working from home. Oh boy, when your commute goes from like half an hour to the 30 seconds it takes to walk across the room, those
Yes.
daily walks have been super, super helpful because I'm a bit of a sloth. And if I don't force myself
Get
to
out.
get
Yeah.
out, then I can actually stay right in here. And that's
Mhm.
not ideal.
Yeah. I love all those observations. So I want to go back to when you talked about creating your three uniques, or being
Having them come to me.
getting ready for the podcast today. And you said that it almost kept you up at night, which I've heard from some other people before. So I apologize for everyone that's like gone before you, yourself, and anyone that's going to come on. It's not like a way to torture people.
No.
Um, but what have you learned about yourself by just even expressing your three uniques today on the podcast, or anything that as you were, writing these down and coming up with them, any sort of observations or things that you noticed about yourself?
So when I do legacy work with people, asking them to think about the life that they're living
Hmm.
and the legacy that they want to leave, my defining word is always, how are those in alignment?
Right.
And how is the life that you're leading aligning with the legacy that you will leave?
Hmm.
And when we are off, then we are very, very off.
Right.
And when I was going through this, I was like, whoo, I'm going to see if Brenda will let me use this three uniques idea in my work, because holy crow, it just really helped me feel this sense of purpose and alignment and clarity. And I was like, wow, this 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 is aligned as fuck. So
Which is the name of my coaching program. So yes, yeah, and knowing you for the short time that I've gotten to know you, and you expressing your three uniques for all the people that are listening, and people that know you as well, I think there's a great alignment between where it shows up in your life. And I loved how you talked about this hospitality, because a lot of times people will bring it back to, say, a work situation. You talked about it in your home and how you have people
Mm.
over in your home. So the whole idea behind your three uniques, it's just not a career pathing tool. It's there, for all domains of your life: relationships, health, wealth, community impact, as well as career, business, leadership, whatever that looks like for you, how you define
And if I had to draw it, the deeply knowledgeable and having people find comfort, it is actually that hospitality that is the bridge between the two of them. So, yeah, and that hospitality extends way beyond my work.
it. Awesome. Has there been a mentor or a guide for you that's really been pivotal in helping you get to this alignment in your life, where you're fully leveraging those three uniques, in what you do, who you spend your time with?
So many good people, but I would say Sonia Strobel from Skipperato's fishery, community supported fishery. She's a woman who, through all of my changes and transitions, and like, I'm not brave enough to do this yet, but maybe I will be one day.
Hmm.
She's just been so firmly in my corner. And then I recently worked with an organization called the Forum.ca,
Hmm.
and nothing to do with Landmark. It's unfortunate actually that they have that name, but the Forum.ca is for women entrepreneurs, and just they have this tagline where they say we practice community as a verb,
Hmm.
and I love that, and I have felt very nurtured in that community of verb based community. So yeah,
Amazing.
those are my two shout outs for sure.
Amazing. And my last question for you, Krista, is if I was to give you a billboard and you could
Mm.
put anything on it, and it could be anywhere in the world, where would you put it and what would be on it?
I would put it outside. I would put it uh, magically applied to every single person's window, so that when they opened their curtains, it
Hmm.
would light up like this, right? So
Okay.
wherever you would be a magic one. And it would say, be brave, be honest, and be ready.
Nice. Nice. Thank you. And Krista, where can people find you?
Hello at deathsapprentice.ca if they want to email me. If you want to check out my website, www.deathsapprentice.ca. I do a fair bit on Instagram, and that's deathsapprentice.ca, especially for folks who have questions that they're a bit shy about asking. Instagram is a great spot because I have a fun little thing called Ask the Apprentice that
Love
will
that
help
handle.
people.
Great.
Yeah, that helps people. And I have so many questions to go through, so that'll be very ongoing. So those would be the easiest ways.
And then you also have a radio show, or you're a guest
Oh, yeah, I'm
radio
on
show.
Cheryl McKay's North by Northwest, which is on CBC, CBC Radio 1 or the Listen app anywhere in Canada. And it broadcasts all throughout BC once a month.
Hmm.
And for 15 minutes or so once a month, I get to talk about death and dying and end of life and transition spaces and the beautiful liminal space of end of life. Cheryl, for anyone who's a local listener, a lot of people know her because if your radio is turned on Sunday morning,
Hmm.
more than 40% of radios are turned on to that radio station. So it's like, it's for sure the biggest listenership. And she's just such a lovely human. We've become friends over this past year. And that's once a month. And actually on my website, I have all of the back episodes and they're short. So if you're, and they're very tailored. So each one is about a specific thing. And because they're so short, I get a lot of feedback. People are like, oh, this was such a great starting point. So there's one on holistic advanced care planning. Go listen to it, everybody.
There you go. All right. Well, Krista, thanks so much for being on today. And for everyone tuning in, I always say this at the end of my podcast. There's 7.8 billion people on this planet. Get out there and share what makes you unique. Take care, Krista.
Thank you.